Greetings, Trek Profile listeners. This is John, your host, with a quick note before we jump into the episode. Doing the kind of show that I do, I'm interviewing a new person almost every episode, and that sometimes comes with its own challenges. One of those is that the audio quality from my guests can vary from show to show. In this particular episode, we had some pretty serious audio quality problems with my guest's sound. We tried our best to clean it up, but there are still some issues with it. So I just wanted to apologize for that in advance and thank you for being a listener to the show. All right, let's roll it. Trek Profiles Podcast, episode 48, recorded November 2020. This is the Trek Profiles Podcast, where each episode we sit down with a Star Trek fan. We learn their Star Trek story, and we try to figure out why we all love this show so much. I'm John, your intrepid host of this whole enterprise, and I welcome you to this, the Trek Profiles Podcast, episode 48. If you wish to get in touch with us, you can reach us via email, feedback@trekprofiles.com, or on Facebook or Twitter @TrekProfiles. Spoiler warning, people. As we record this, we are in the middle of Season 3 of Star Trek Discovery, so all previous content up to and including that point is fair game and may be discussed during this episode. You have been warned, human. As always, my trusty sidekick and co-host is my brilliant assistant, the efficient and consistent yet slightly distant M5 Multitronic unit. Say hello, M5.
M5 at full power.
M5, show me the messages.
News and updates displayed.
The Trek Profiles Podcast is an independent show. If you'd like to support us, the best way to do that is to subscribe via your preferred podcasting platform. As we do annually here on Trek Profiles, I do take a moment to ask that if you enjoy the show and you'd like to show your appreciation and you're able to do so, please consider making a donation in any amount to this wonderful charity called the Children's Fund for Glycogen Storage Disease. It's the official charity for the show, and I make this request every year, basically for the first couple episodes. I don't have a supporters program. The show's 100% free. There's no ads either in the episodes or on my website. I don't have a Patreon. I don't have a Substack. I don't have an Etsy store. I don't have any of those things. So there's no way to give me money for the show. But if you'd like to do something and you're able, there'll be a link in the show notes for this episode to donate a few quatlus to this charity. And if you'd like to know why I selected it and why it's personally meaningful to me, I would encourage you to go back and check out episode 34 of the podcast, my extravaganza episodes, where I give the whole story. Thank you sincerely for even considering it. I'd appreciate it so much. This edition of the show continues the occasional series that we've been doing with brand new Star Trek fans. We started with Salwa in episode 41. We continued that with Olivia in show 45. And this is Jimmy's story, who came to Trek really only a little while ago. I've really enjoyed talking to these new fans who only really got into the show in the last year or so. They have a very different perspective than those of us who are quote-unquote lifers. I've really enjoyed talking to them, and I hope you have too. Please send me a DM or an email, feedback@trekprofiles.com, and let me know what you think. There are some lightly edited outtakes and bonus material at the end of the episode. They will come after the ending audio cards. Enjoy them, or not, as you choose. Let's do the Kobayashi Maru questions from episode 45 with Olivia. I asked these questions of my guest, and then after each episode drops, I tweet out the questions for that episode as Twitter polls so y'all can have your say. So if you don't follow me on Twitter and you're on there and you want to have your say on this episode's questions, go ahead and follow me and you'll be able to respond. All right, let's do it. Phaser, communicator, or tricorder. Olivia picked the phaser, but the listeners responded that they wanted the tricorder by 65%, to the phaser for 19%, and the communicator for 16%. Would you rather have your own personal transporter or your own personal holodeck? Olivia wanted the transporter, and so did the audience by 66% to 34%. Choose your security officer, Commander Nand or Commander Tuvok. My guest picked Tuvok, and so did the listeners by 62% to 38%. You're on Deep Space Nine? You need a job. You've got two offers from these fine shops on the promenade, Spacely Sprockets or Yoyodyne Propulsion Systems. Olivia picked Yoyodyne, but the poll respondents said Spacely Sprockets all the way by a commanding 82% to 18%. And finally, which blind date would be worse, Mirror Georgiou and Tilly or Jadzia Dax with Takuvma? Olivia picked the Georgiou Tilly combo, and the Twitter tweeps agreed by 54 to 46%. That's it for messages, news, and weather. Let's move on. Hey, M5, let's run the profile for this week's guest, and let's start the show.
M5 is processing.
His favorite regular is Worf, but his favorite guest is Garrick. He's a big Andorian fan, but his favorite ship is the 1701D. He's from Northern Idaho, North America, Earth, in Sector 001. It's Jimmy McShane. Welcome, Jimmy, and thanks for being on the podcast.
It's good to be here. Thanks for having me.
Oh, absolutely. Now, Jimmy, this is going to be a strange question, I think, because of some of the stuff we're going to get into here, but I have to ask you question one, which is, are you a Star Trek fan?
Yes, I definitely am.
And how long have you been a Star Trek fan?
I'm not sure exactly when the cutoff point is that you become a Star Trek fan. Like, how much of the show do you have to have watched to become a Star Trek fan?
I don't believe there's any external rules, man.
Okay.
If you say you're a Star Trek fan, I'm going to believe you. So when was the first time you would have described yourself as a Star Trek fan?
Probably somewhere in the middle of watching Next Gen. So, maybe a little bit less than a year ago.
A little less than a year ago as we record this. So you are a newcomer to the fandom.
For the most part, yes.
Now, I'm going to assume, because we don't know each other, I'm going to assume that you grew up here in the United States?
I did, yes.
And so you obviously knew that there was this thing called Star Trek. It existed in pop culture, right? It's almost impossible to live here and not at least know that it exists. So you must have been aware of it from a very early age.
Well, of course. And in fact, I actually saw all of the Next Gen movies in theaters because my dad loved going to movies. And so we would go to the movies all the time. And so I was really young. For the most part, I didn't really remember the movies other than I remembered certain things about the movies because I was 5 years old, I think, when Generations came out. And even as a 5-year-old, I remember thinking Kirk's death was really stupid. I'd seen some Star Trek things, but for a reason, I'd never wanted to watch it for whatever. I mean, I was into other things, I guess.
You grew up having seen a couple of the films. You're aware that there's this thing out there in pop culture.
Right.
What was sort of your opinion of Star Trek fans? And I want you to be honest, what was your opinion of these people who seem to be really into this show, just as someone who wasn't?
I didn't give it much thought at all outside of the typical Star Trek fan you'd see in a bad sitcom or comedy. Just the super nerdy, could speak old Klingon, super fan who lives alone in their mother's basement and never did anything. I just didn't give it much thought outside of that because I was also pretty young at this point. When I grew up and realized I was a nerd, even before I started watching Star Trek, my opinion changed dramatically. So.
Okay, now you have to take me back to about, I guess it was a year or some other point in time where you decided to actively watch the show.
Oddly enough, that's not when I decided to start watching it. I was going to try to watch it with a friend of mine.
Okay.
And we started watching this, I think, in 2012. And we were going to watch all the original series and Next Gen together. And that may seem ambitious, but we'd actually watched other shows together. We watched The X-Files and its sister show Millennium and The Lone Gunman together.
Oh, yeah, great shows.
Yeah, they are. Millennium, fascinating show, I think, actually.
It was a little bit high concept, I think, for mass market TV.
Well, that, and also it was 3 different shows each of its season, I would argue. But I love season 2. That was great.
Just a quick question. Is this in person or is this online or is this just you would just watch them and then talk about it?
We would watch them together. We watched all these shows together.
Okay.
And so the idea of, that was more episodes than Star Trek, the original series and Next Gen. So it seemed doable. But we were in college when we watched these shows together. And then we graduated college and got jobs, got married, did a whole bunch of things. And so we watched about 1 season of the original series together over the course of 8 years.
Wow.
And so watching Star Trek is something I planned on doing for a while. Never found time for it. And then what happened was I moved. And watching it with him no longer became a possibility. And so I just kind of dug into it during the move.
At what point in watching the show did you decide that, well, I'm really into this?
I enjoyed the original series as a kind of an artifact of the 60s, like how ridiculous that show is. I loved it. But I didn't necessarily think that made me a Star Trek fan because it's so different from the rest of Star Trek. And even when I started watching it, I knew that. But yeah, no, I loved, one episode, Kirk and Spock would become gangsters in the 1920s on a different planet. And the next episode, they'd be Nazis. And then there was no rules. It was bonkers. I think somewhere in the middle of season 3 or 4 of Next Gen, it was like, okay, this is amazing. This is great. And I was really confident I was going to like other Star Trek after that as well.
So one of the things I'm interested in, especially people who watch Trek sequentially, like yourself, who have not really been exposed to it, is that TOS is TOS. And then if you jump into Next Gen, like the first couple seasons are not so great. Right? Especially compared to the other seasons. Would you recommend to other people who are in your particular situation that they consume it in this way, or would you have a different recommendation?
Well, so I was told that early Next Gen wasn't great. So I went in with that expectation. And this is not the first show I've watched with that expectation, notably Babylon 5. Mm-hmm. That season 1 of Babylon 5 is probably some of the worst television I've ever watched.
You're stabbing me in the heart here, man, because I'm a huge Babylon 5 fan.
I am too. I loved starting season 2. It's great, but there's some episodes in that first season where I was just like, am I going to be able to get through this?
Yeah.
But I did, and Babylon 5 is amazing. I love it. Yeah, so I see the value in maybe saying we'll start with season 2, because I think season 2 is a little underrated actually, and that's kind of where it seems like the show finds its voice and finds its stride. Mm-hmm. Season 1 I didn't necessarily think it was as bad as a lot of people said it was. It was just mostly kind of average and below average, I would say. Okay. You could kind of tell they hadn't figured out the characters yet, and they hadn't figured out how they were going to do the show yet. And I'm not exactly sure when they figured it out, but it was somewhere during season 2. And I know there was a lot of behind the scenes issues, weren't there?
Oh yeah, there was a lot of disaster going on. If you want a good documentary sort of view of that, William Shatner actually did a documentary called Chaos on the Bridge. And it talks about a lot of what was going on. And it's actually quite good. It really talks about sort of a lot of the stuff that's on the production side that doesn't show up on screen. It really had to do with the fact that Roddenberry was trying to hold on to the show, and he wasn't in the best of health at the time, and his attorney started getting involved in the actual making of the show. And it was this guy, Leonard Maizlish, who was infamous in the fandom for a lot of things.
Oh, I had no idea.
Yeah, there's a whole story there, which you can get into if you want to read about it. But basically, there was just a lot of chaos, which is exactly the right word to use. Writers coming and going, different people being involved in the show. It's really a little bit of a mess. So, and I think some of that just carried through to what you end up with, because they're trying to produce a show under these crazy constraints, and that's what happens.
Yeah, no, I definitely feel like that kind of echoed on screen a bit. Some interesting choices. I never expected Data to be hooking up with someone in the 4th or the 5th episode.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, fully functional. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, fully functional. Yeah, Jesus. And then even Tasha's death was kind of weird. It wasn't this huge death. It was just in the middle of the episode, she fell into a puddle of oil and died. I don't know. You could just kind of feel the behind the scenes chaos and what came out on screen.
One of the things I do think about when I think about Tasha Yar's death is that appreciate's the wrong word, I think. But one of the things I appreciate, quote unquote, about it is that it was just sort of arbitrary, because you have to assume that doing the things that they're doing in Star Trek, I mean, they're going out into the great beyond and exploring stuff. And, there's no rules where they are, right? That every now and then something crazy could happen, right? And life does sometimes deal you a bad hand. And, it's sort of like in some of the other episodes of other shows, and even in Star Trek, they do some of this, where if they decide they're going to write a character off, they give them this vast heroic death where that they reach and hit the button to save the universe as their last act, and it's that's almost tropey at this point, it's okay, that's enough. Just stop it. And I liked how they chose not to do that, right? It really was a sort of a workaday moment, she's doing her duty. They have an alien Armus. They're trying to do their thing. And, he just is nope, not having it. Boom, and that's how it goes. And not that I want the show to be arbitrary, but that is life. And that does sometimes happen. So I respect the choice in that one. I know that other people might disagree with me.
Fair enough. I think that's a fair point. I think my problem was that I had yet to really connect with the character personally. And part of it was I didn't remember her from my childhood, with the Next Gen movie. So I was well, maybe she doesn't stick around. I'm not sure. I had never connected with the character, and then she just suddenly dies. I'm that's it? I don't know. Yeah, I think it would have been a really interesting choice if we had 3 seasons of Tasha, and then suddenly in the middle of an episode, she's just killed randomly like that. That I think would have been really interesting. I think that's a really good point. But I think at that point in the show, personally, I had to connect with her, and so the death didn't really stick with me. It just felt crap, this actress doesn't want to be here anymore. Let's write her up.
Yeah, which is what happened.
Right.
She wanted off the show, so it wasn't a situation where she was working for 3 years on the show. she just felt like she wasn't getting anything useful to do besides hailing frequencies open. So
right. Well, that's also maybe part of the reason why I didn't connect with her too much, because she really didn't seem like she did much.
Let's see, there's that eye-rolling, horrible scene where, she's like, it's all about, drugs are bad.
Oh,
right?
yeah.
So there's that, which is eye-rollingly terrible.
Yep.
And then, of course, there's her growing up on that planet, which is a disastrous example of a Federation colony gone awry with the rape gangs and all that kind of stuff.
Right.
So as we record this in the fall of 2020, how much of Star Trek have you seen? There's roughly 800 hours out there.
I've seen all of it.
So everything, including the new shows?
Everything. And I watched it mostly in production order. I watched it TOS. I watched the animated series. And then I watched the original cast movies.
Mm-hmm.
I watched Next Gen, Deep Space Nine, Voyager chronologically. I found a website that put the episodes chronologically.
Stardate order.
Stardate order. Which is not that different from production order, but there are some situations like with Deep Space Nine. I'd watch a big block at Deep Space Nine, and that would leave a decent block of Voyager for me to watch as well. So that I watched Stardate order, a lot, including the movies and stuff like that, because I knew at some point Worf ended up in Deep Space Nine.
Yep.
I knew that I wanted to watch those movies and just to kind of see if they connected and how they connected with Deep Space Nine, which mostly was a throwaway line, but I still enjoyed it in First Contact when you see the Defiant and Worf is jumping around. Although I was a little disappointed the Defiant was taken out. It wasn't destroyed, right? It was just damaged.
Well, it was out of commission, and so they replaced it and then renamed it, or renamed another ship.
That's right. Right. So that was weird. And that's something, if I had just watched Deep Space Nine without watching the movies, I'd be like, oh, that's weird. Personally, for me, I like seeing the connection between the series. So I actually kind of wish I had watched the original cast movies along with Next Gen, because there's that two-parter with Spock that came out before. I'm bad with names, especially since I've watched all of this in a year. But
Unification, that's the TNG episode.
The Unification one, and then also with the sixth movie, is it the
Undiscovered Country?
Undiscovered Country, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like that was supposed to promote the Undiscovered Country, right?
Oh, it could be that you're testing my memory there. I'm not. That's not the kind of thing I remember, the chronological dates of these things. We can look it up if you want, but
because I would sometimes go on like Wikipedia after the episodes, kind of read about the behind the scenes, and what I thought I read was that like Spock on there was supposed to set that up, and he like had a line in that episode where he was like, after what happened last time with the Klingons, I don't want to go like that again, or something like that. It was supposed to like kind of tease and foreshadow with the Undiscovered Country. And while it was kind of interesting to have watched that first, so I knew what Spock was talking about, it also would have been kind of cool to have that tease prior to going into the movie itself. Because that is something that I personally enjoy. I enjoy the connections and the way that the shows work together. And that's one of the reasons I watched it the way I did. And I didn't want to watch Enterprise first. I did think about watching Enterprise first, though.
Okay.
And I watched the first episode. And I got to the scene where T'Pol and Trip were decontaminating each other. Mm-hmm. And I decided I was not going to start with Enterprise.
The allegedly sexy decontamination gel?
Yeah, the allegedly sexy, yes, that was interesting.
So that's the point where he's like, that's it, I'm out?
Well, I was like, I'm going to save this one for later.
Okay.
And of course, that show doesn't have the best reputation as well. So I was kind of like, I'll watch that after I'm a fan of Star Trek. But yeah, so then I finished Voyager and the Next Gen movies, and I did Enterprise. And then, I still watch Nora, and then I did Discovery, Picard, Lower Decks, and everything. And I'm caught up on Discovery right now. So yeah, I've seen it all. So
this was when the new shows were coming out, Discovery, Season 1, and Lower Decks and all that. You were watching it as it came out on CBS.
So I was not caught up at that point. In fact, my goal was to be caught up by the beginning of Season 3 of Discovery, and I missed it by a couple of weeks.
Okay.
I finally got fully caught up when we were like maybe 3 episodes into the season of Discovery.
So now you're finally a freshly baked, fresh out of the oven completist.
Exactly. Yeah. Now I have everything. And I did see the Kelvin movies, but I also saw those in theaters. Those were probably one of the reasons I also were like, I should watch the Star Trek show, which is something I've seen a lot on because I went back and listened to your episodes. It does seem like a lot of the fan base seems to be really critical of those movies, but they did seem to bring a lot of people to Star Trek, it seemed to me.
Oh, I think they're great films. I mean, I'm of the opinion, and it might be an unpopular opinion, but I don't believe Star Trek actually works that well as a movie. I think it actually works best as episodic TV or episodic streaming. I think that's actually its highest and best use because of the kinds of Star Trek that I'm interested in, which is more of these morality sort of ethical dilemmas and really examining the human condition in that way. One of the questions that sometimes comes up in the fandom today is, when is Star Trek going to get back on the big screen? And my retort to that is, honestly, what stories can't they tell right now? Right? Because the main purposes of movies were like to get more budget, to get out of TV censorship, right? And not have to worry about that. You could do all that now. They could do that right now. They could release movie length episodes right now on CBS All Access. They have a budget right now that looks completely cinematic. What is it that they could not do right now with the platform that they have, right? They could do it all.
It's amazing. It is amazing watching the show starting in the 60s going to now, like how you compare that 60s episode with Discovery. It's night and day. I mean, it's crazy how far TV has advanced to the point is movies don't look that much better these days.
No, than some of the stuff on TV, yeah.
I mean, they still look a little bit better, but not much, yeah, than TV. And so, yeah, exactly. I mean, Discovery is cinematic quality. And in fact, like The Mandalorian, that looks like a movie to me. Like, I don't see any difference in The Mandalorian and movies as far as the quality goes.
Right, yeah, they can do literally anything they want to do. So specifically for TOS, when you were watching it, on what platform or how did you watch it?
My friend who I watched initially, his mom had the Blu-ray. I think when we started watching it is when they released the Blu-ray where they updated the graphics and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. So that's how I initially started watching it. But then when I started watching it after I moved, it was all on Netflix. Okay, so here's a recommendation for you that might be, it's more of an intellectual interest sort of thing. If you ever get your hands on your own copy of the Blu-rays from TOS, one of the things that they have available on there is you can actually watch and compare and contrast the original series version of the episode with the remasters. Yeah.
And you can see like how wildly different they were and kind of the stuff they got away with on 60s TV. I mean, it was amazing, right?
And honestly, I would have preferred to watch it that way. I wish Netflix did give me that option because I love bad special effects. I love shows doing the best they can with what they have because that's what they were doing. I love looking for the little strings and stuff like that.
Yeah, you can see some of that stuff in the original series, and that's one of the things I think that was actually so special and wonderful about the TOS remasters is that they really didn't try to make it look like a modern show. Even some of those scenes, you'd have to think for a second to be like, oh, wait a minute, is this really something new? Like, it's very true to the aesthetic. They didn't try to just totally make it look like, Star Trek Discovery or something like that, because that would have been really incongruous in my opinion. So
it would have been really goofy looking too.
Yeah, it wouldn't have been good. But I liked it. Okay. So now you've decided that you're a Star Trek fan. I have to ask, have you felt compelled to buy any Star Trek merch?
Oddly enough, I do already have some.
Ooh, tell me.
A couple years ago, I'm a teacher and we did like themed groups, like the science department did this thing, math department did this thing, and our department did Star Trek.
Okay.
And so I was like, okay, I've only seen a little bit of Star Trek. Who do I want to be? And I decided to be Will Riker because he's the only character with a beard. And I do have a Star Trek shirt that I can wear as a costume. But beyond that, not really.
So wait a minute. You were cosplaying as Riker before you were even a fan?
Yes.
Oh, that's outstanding. Now, if you have a picture of you in that outfit, you should send it to me, and I will put it up on the show notes page over at TrekProfiles. My listeners would love that.
I might have a picture for sure.
Yeah, take a look and send it to me. So have you been to or have you given any thought to putting the COVID issue aside if you would ever go to a Star Trek convention?
I would definitely be willing to if the circumstances were right. Obviously, like you said, put the COVID issue aside. I'm not sure if there's any near where I live. But yes, I'd love to go under the right circumstances.
Oh, that's glorious. Now, I do have a good friend, Haley, who's a big Star Trek fan, who's also up there in Idaho. So I'll ask her about that, and I'll send you whatever she sends me. And if you're listening to this, Haley, here's a big shout out for you. She's a glorious person in the Star Trek fandom. Well, Jimmy, I think that's great, but my co-host, the M5, does some gentle internet sleuthing and does a little bit of internet research on you. And so one of the things that it wanted me to ask you about was your memories about watching Next Gen with your offspring. So please tell me about this Star Trek memory.
Well, yeah, of course. When you have a baby late at night, you have to feed her, right? And so I would get up and make a bottle, turn on Next Gen, because that's where I was in my watch of this. And I would feed her and watch an episode and then rock her to sleep. And that would take about 45 minutes. So it was nicely paced. And it's just a wonderful memory that I have, that I will always have, and a wonderful connection that I have watching the show I enjoy with some, I don't know, if you don't have kids, maybe you don't understand, but it's it just brings me such joy to think about.
So what percentage of the way through your evil plan to raise your daughter as a dyed-in-the-wool Star Trek fan are you? Would you say 10%, 20%? How are you going so far on that?
I don't know. So, I did briefly try to show her the animated series.
Oh, goodness.
But she wasn't into it yet. I'm a little too young for that. So not very far.
Okay.
Not very far, but there will be further attempts.
Okay. Well, that's one of the things I will say about Star Trek Lower Decks, the Lower Decks animated show, is that it is the only Star Trek my 12-year-old will watch with me. He is not interested in any of the other bits of it. He knows it's Dad's thing, but when he heard there was an animated show coming out, he's like, yeah, I'll watch that. So we got to watch that together. So that was kind of nice. That was kind of nice. All right. Well, I think we should talk about some episodes. Are you game?
All right, let's do it. I'm down, yeah.
All right. Well, I have them in a particular order that the M5 put together for me. Let's start with a TOS episode, and I'm really excited because this is one that I don't think off the top of my head has come up on the podcast before, and that's the Tholian Web, Season 3, Episode 9. We have the amazing spacesuits that they wear. Yes. We have the missing Defiant, which turns into a much bigger thing and is revisited in 2 different series later on, maybe even 3, I don't remember, but it's certainly a big issue. What is it about this particular episode that speaks to you, Jimmy?
Well, I think, when you asked me to come up with some episodes and you said find some that have particular emotional attachment, the problem is I watched this in a year. Not too many episodes have particular emotional attachment. So what I did is I just kind of looked at the list of episodes. And I didn't want to pick like the best of the series because one, you probably talk to death about all those. And I also think part of what makes Star Trek great are the average episodes are still really good and really enjoyable. So I wanted to pick an episode that I just thought encapsulated what I really loved about the series. And the Tholian Web jumped off the page to me. One of the things I enjoyed the most about the original series, not necessarily the movies, but the original series, is that relationship between Kirk, McCoy, and Spock. Because I felt like a big part of the original series is kind of comparing their outlooks and, Spock trying to be extremely logical, McCoy being extremely emotional, and Kirk being kind of intuiting and combining the two. And of course, I feel like that relationship is the focus of this. And they even make it a focus by removing Kirk for the majority of the episode. Mm-hmm. And then it's just like looking at Spock and McCoy, who I like them both better as characters than Kirk personally. I do like Kirk. And seeing them, because they don't like each other. That's something I actually legitimately enjoy. Like, in any other circumstance, McCoy would just absolutely hate Spock, and he still kind of does, but they've just been through so much together, they're kind of friends. And I feel like Spock, he would find hate like an emotion, so he wouldn't hate McCoy, but secretly he does. And so they have to work together, and Kirk leaves them this message. And I still enjoy at the end of the episode, McCoy still doesn't like Spock. I mean, there's still like a doubt, but I don't know. I liked that examination of the relationship of the three. And what I also enjoyed just anything went. I don't think the Tholian Web really makes too much sense as a concept, mm-hmm. because at least the way they presented it, like Enterprise could have fit through there, and like the amount of time it would have taken. I know they were waiting for Kirk, but the amount of time it would have taken for them to build that web, like in any other situation, they would just be gone, right? I mean, but it still worked because they had the dynamic, and I also enjoyed the Tholians themselves. I feel like later in Star Trek, the aliens kind of got more normal looking, mm-hmm. and I think a lot of that was budgetary because they had to do 25 episodes a season, just put some prosthetics on and call them an alien.
Yeah, some foreheads or nose bumps.
Exactly. Yeah. But the Tholians, and this is true throughout all of the original series, Tholians are some weird looking aliens.
Yeah.
And I liked that. I liked the creativity that the original series had. And I still think the original series is probably the most creative of the Star Trek shows.
Oh, interesting.
I don't know if not that the other shows weren't creative, but like the amount of things they encountered on the original series that are just off the wall weird. That's an aspect I personally really enjoyed about the original series. Sometimes it felt like they were going as weird as they possibly could. Like the rock monster from, is it The Beast Below?
Savage Curtain?
I don't know, but the rock monster.
Is that the one with Abraham Lincoln?
Oh yeah, exactly. Abraham Lincoln. It was a giant Abraham Lincoln, right?
Yeah, he's in his chair, and then he comes down to the planet.
Exactly. Yeah. No other Star Trek series would have had a giant Abraham Lincoln as its villain for an episode, and that's just something I love about the original series.
Well, he wasn't the villain, really, but I get what you're saying.
He was kind of the antagonist, I guess.
I get what you were saying. Yeah, and it is true that the Tholians were really, as far as a concept, were really pushing it for the 60s show.
Yeah.
But obviously you saw in Enterprise, they had sort of an animated digital Tholian that was that was a whole different thing.
It was. And I do understand you have to change things over time. Things are going to, you're not going to, like the Klingons, right? The Klingons, TOS to, the 90s to Discovery, they look like three different races.
This is dangerous territory, man, because there are some people. No, it's fine. Not for me. I'm not one of those people, but there is an entire segment of the fandom who was like, I can't believe they changed the Klingons. And it's like, you know what, dude, that is not a fruitful discussion. Because you're going right back to TOS, and then you go into the motion picture in 1979, and who were those guys on screen, right? They changed the Klingons then.
I didn't realize they were Klingons when I first watched that movie, by the way. I thought they were just some new alien. And then I think they mentioned they were Klingons in the movie, or...
Yeah, they talk about it later, yeah.
Okay, yeah, but it was a little confusing for me because I wasn't sure who they were talking about. I was like, wait, were those Klingons? Even though I'd seen Worf, I didn't realize Worf was a Klingon from the Next Gen movie. So
talk about controversy, but I would assert that Worf is not a Klingon. He's a Klingon fanboy. He's probably one of the least Klingons you'll ever meet, because when we see the Klingons in their natural habitat, they're not really like him.
Well, that's one of the reasons actually why Worf is my favorite character, at least of the main, because he's not Klingon, but he wants so bad to be Klingon, and I like that they actually explore Klingon culture by showing you how not Klingon Worf is. And I think it's great. I think it's really well done, and that's one of the reasons I really like Worf, because you're right. He's not. I mean, he's biologically a Klingon, but he's human. He just can't. He's in denial.
Yeah, he's in denial. Yeah, and he's in denial about what the Klingons actually are. And it's only until very late in Deep Space Nine, Season 7, that he really gets forced to address this by Ezri, of all people, which I think is glorious. One little bit of trivia that I found was amusing about this episode as I was doing my research for this is that in Japan, the name of the episode wasn't the Tholian Web. It was Crisis of Captain Kirk, who was thrown into different dimensional space, which I think is awesome. So from now on, I will forever refer to this episode as Crisis of Captain Kirk, who was thrown into different dimensional space, with a hyphen in between different and dimensional. It's glorious.
That is glorious.
So let's talk about a high concept episode. Let's talk about TNG Remember Me, Season 4, Episode 5, a really big Gates McFadden, Dr. Crusher episode, a little bit of a bottle episode that they did to save some money because it mostly takes place on the ship and there's not a lot of other stuff going on with planets and, exterior shots. So here we have the one where everyone is disappearing off the ship except for Crusher and Picard. And there's sort of this weird sort of thing about Crusher. She's like, am I imagining all this? Am I crazy? Am I not? What's going on? So this is an episode that you picked. The M5 concurred in that selection. What is it about this episode that is meaningful, special, or noteworthy?
This is the first episode my wife watched and was like, you know what? Star Trek's a good show. She had seen some episodes before just as I was watching it and doing other things, and she was trying like, okay, yeah, this is a good show. I mean, she still didn't sit down and watch it, but she would sometimes watch episodes with me. After this, during this one, she's like, okay, I'm interested to see what happened, what's going on here. And that's one of the reasons I picked this one. I also picked this one because I really liked it. It showed what I really liked about Next Gen, and that is, for the most part, there are exceptions to this, but for the most part, every episode of Next Gen was like a character piece on a different character. Mm-hmm. You have the different centric episodes, and this one was, of course, a Bentley Crusher centric. And what I liked about the way Next Gen did it is it would usually be high concept sci-fi that kind of put you in a weird situation, but also these episodes would challenge the characters to their cores. Whether it was a philosophical or ethical dilemma, or here, like Crusher is challenged. It's challenging her perception of reality. It's challenging her sanity. It's challenging her intellect. It's challenging her relationships with her coworkers and her son. Like, she is completely challenged and isolated in this episode. And I think it's a fantastic look at her character and what she does in a crisis. And in this case, her reaction is to go to the scientific method and try to deduce what's going on. Mm-hmm. But I loved how character-driven Next Gen was and how different the characters were. I mean, they were all kind of this professional, not military, but kind of sort of military-esque personality, but beyond that, they were all really different. And so that kind of gave the show a little bit of variety when in different episodes. You put Jordy in a situation, he's going to react differently than Beverly. And sometimes it's fun to think about, like, oh, so who would have died in this situation?
Right.
If they were put in it. There's also something else I really, really appreciated about Next Gen. And this is true in this episode, even though all the characters, for the most part, were made up from Beverly's thoughts. But it's consistent throughout the series. And when something weird would happen and a character would go like, hey, this weird thing happened, everyone automatically believed her that it happened. It drives me crazy when you watch these supernatural or sci-fi shows when like something weird happens, they're like, oh, you just imagined it, or it's not what you think it was. And like, that's half the conflict of the episode, is getting people to believe. I really appreciated something about Next Gen is something would happen, they would immediately be like, okay, let's look into this. Let's see why this happened. And they would try to figure it out.
Mm-hmm.
Also, I do kind of feel like listening to your show, Beverly Crusher seems like kind of a maligned character a little bit in the fan base.
Please don't assume that just because someone says something on my show that it's representative of my own views.
Not necessarily your views, but just in the fan base in general. Because people point out that she doesn't necessarily have a huge character arc and stuff like that.
That's a fair criticism. You do hear that from time to time. She doesn't get the same TLC that a lot of other characters get.
That's true, but I would still argue she's still a really good character, and as evident, she's capable of holding a story up on her own. And she's done several. Of course, she also had that terrible episode about where she was possessed by a ghost or something.
Sub Rosa, yeah, the infamous sexy ghost scene.
Yeah, in the middle of the episode, I'm like, what happened to the show? Not that I don't even think season 7's that bad, but that episode was hilarious. But I guess I think she's a bit of an underrated character.
One of the things that you brought up is how you enjoyed how Trek was very focused, Next Gen in particular is very focused on characters. And that's actually an innovation from Michael Piller, who came in after a lot of the chaos that was in the early seasons. And he was the guy who was put in charge of the writers. And one of his innovations was he told all the writers that if you're going to pitch me a script, you have to walk in and the first thing out of your mouth is going to be, this is an episode about character X. So like you had to walk in and say, here's a Picard episode I'm going to pitch, or here's a Worf episode or an O'Brien episode, whatever it was. And he would hear no other kinds of introductions. Like you had to walk in and pitch it that way. And so that's what you got, right? And so every episode was really focused on a particular character, which I thought was a particularly great thing.
Well, I think that's what makes the show great, because that wasn't there for season 1. It was kind of there for season 2. You had some episodes that were pretty character focused. That was nice. But yeah, the show didn't really become a great show, in my opinion, until they started doing that, like you mentioned, making them really character focused.
One of the interesting things about this episode, too, is that it was actually pitched as sort of the B story for another episode, which was Family, or Best of Both Worlds Part 3. I think that was an excellent decision to not do that.
That doesn't make any sense.
No, I think, man, that would have been a dumpster fire of galactic proportions.
Yeah.
You don't need, there's nothing in the episode Family that needs any sci-fi nonsense. You don't need, quirky on fields and, let's focus the emitters. You don't need any of that in that episode.
That episode was great because it didn't have that.
Yeah.
And if it had that, it would have been a below average. Yeah. And where was this? Like, what would the story have been? Like, Picard's on his vineyard and Crusher was missing or something? I don't understand even where that would have fit.
But they do that all the time in Star Trek, right? They have sort of the A story and the B story, and just they might only tangentially interact, if even at all. So sometimes you just sort of have that structure in the show. It's just part of how they did the TV back then. But it is what it is.
I get that, but this doesn't feel like a B story. Maybe that's why they decided not to go with it.
It makes a lot of sense. I'm just glad they chose to surgically extract that and not do it that way. Because, oh, goodness, I just think, it would have taken something great and make it less so. But then again, what do I know? I mean, I'm the guy that I watch those. I watch Bob Ross anytime he's on PBS. If you know who Bob Ross is?
No, I do. My wife loves Bob Ross.
And if anyone doesn't love Bob Ross, we cannot be friends. In fact, turn off this podcast. You shouldn't even do this.
Oh, no.
I'm watching Bob Ross do a painting, and it's so beautiful. And then he's like, maybe we'll put a tree right in the middle. I'm like, no, you're going to ruin it. Don't do it. And then he puts a thing in there, and it's better.
Fair enough.
So my opinions on this stuff are very, very suspicious. So I'm not sure anyone should pay any attention to me. Okay, let's talk about a Deep Space Nine episode. Let's talk about Deep Space Nine, The Darkness and the Light. Deep Space Nine, Season 5, Episode 11. This is the one where we have a secret enemy who is systematically murdering Kira's Shakar resistance cell members. Really a very particular kind of almost noir episode in a lot of ways. But I'm curious as to why out of all of Deep Space Nine, this is the one that you thought might be worthy of our attention.
Yeah, so I did try to go back and watch these episodes I listed. I did not get them all done, but I did rewatch this one. I had completely forgotten that Kira was pregnant in this episode.
Yeah, it's a big part of it.
There's been a lot of interesting choices TV shows have made to try to like deal with an actress getting pregnant. This is the most bizarre I've ever seen. Surgically implanting the baby into a different woman. I was like, okay, that's interesting.
It's a sci-fi show, man.
It's a sci-fi show. And you know what? It was actually probably the right choice because Kira's character arc did not need a kid, for sure. And so giving O'Brien's another kid worked that well there, I think. But what stood out about this one, well, first of all, I like the episode. Again, like with the Next Gen, I did like how character-driven Deep Space Nine was. Everyone likes the big story of Deep Space Nine. And I like that too. But I still like they never lost the character-driven nature of the show.
Mm-hmm.
And this is a very character-driven episode. And what I also liked about Deep Space Nine, and definitely at least initially, this kind of became less true as the show got on, but Next Gen was exploring the galaxy. Original Series was exploring the galaxy, and both shows did a lot of world building and did a lot of establishing races and working on stuff and stuff like that. I like that Deep Space Nine just stopped. And they just found a corner of the Star Trek galaxy and they explored it. In this case, the Cardassian-Bajoran conflict. Mm-hmm. And of course, eventually, after Next Gen ended, it eventually became a galaxy span. It actually became more important to the universe than anything in Next Gen ever was, other than maybe some Borg episodes. But early on, and it still kept the Cardassian-Bajoran focus throughout, it just explored this relationship between Cardassian and Bajorans. And this is also something I think is great about Next Gen. They did a lot of things that I think you could have built an entire series around. But this was one of the more interesting ones. And this episode in particular was exploring that relationship between the Bajoran-Cardassian conflict. And what else makes Deep Space Nine different, the Next Gen, and this has been mentioned a lot, Next Gen original series, it's a utopia, right? Like, humanity's got to figure it out. No discrimination, no poverty. We're exploring the galaxy, working together. And of course, Deep Space Nine.
We're going to disagree on that, by the way.
We are? Okay. Fair enough. You spent a lot more time with these episodes than I have. I've seen them all once, so I'm sure I'm forgetting something. But Deep Space Nine was like, okay, let's look at the darker side of this universe. And this is, of course, an episode that really explores that. What I also like about this episode is obviously murdering a bunch of people is wrong, but it does ask the question: is what Kira did wrong? And I like that Kira at the end, so she doesn't think what she did was wrong. I mean, she's like, it was resistance, it was occupation, it was war. We did what we had to do, but the episode doesn't give you that answer. You get to kind of decide for yourself. It does examine kind of morality in these really difficult situations, and I do think that's something Deep Space Nine kind of excelled at.
Absolutely. It's really quite a stellar episode. I always like to compare it to Duet. I think they make a nice pair.
Which one's Duet? I'm sorry.
It's a season 1 episode where this guy shows up on the station, this Cardassian, and Kira is convinced that he's a war criminal.
That's right. Yeah.
Right. And so sort of they make a nice pair of episodes to actually look at, But the thing about Star Trek to me that makes it great is when you can take these things that are in the show and actually bring them into real life scenarios, right? One of the things I've talked about is my family, myself, were Armenian. And so there was an Armenian genocide in the 19-teens, and the government of Turkey still has never come to terms with that, right? That right. Didn't happen, right? In fact, some of those people who are involved with it, they're heroes. They're great, whereas you cross the border, you go into, my ancestral homeland, they're like, no, those are bad dudes, Yeah. So it all depends on your point of view. And I think that whenever Star Trek really grounds itself in the reality of things, you get some really spectacular stuff. But as someone who's new to the show and not steeped in this stuff, I want to point out just one thing that's very amusing.
Okay.
I can't remember now as I record this because it's all got mishmashed in my head as to what's in what episode. But there's this one part where Kira is actually talking to Dr. Bashir about the implanted pregnancy. And Kira says to Bashir, look what you've done to me, something like that. But that has a much deeper level because the child that she's actually carrying is Alexander Siddig's child, the actor who is Dr. Bashir.
Wait, what?
Oh, you didn't know that, did you?
I think I knew they were dating, but I didn't know he was actually the father of their child. That's crazy.
Yeah, he's actually the father of the child that she's carrying. And so when she says that line in the show, it sort of has a, an in the show meaning, and there's kind of a meta meaning beyond that, which is makes it extra tasty for those of us who are in the know. So
that's crazy.
Yeah, now you're in the know.
And it's interesting. I don't think there was ever like a Bashir Kira episode, other than like maybe they had scenes together, but I don't think there was ever an episode where like the two characters had a plot or an adventure together.
It's interesting because I just finished a thorough and complete watch through of Voyager. And one of the things you get a ton of is Janeway in 7.
Right.
You get a ton of the Doctor in 7. I mean, there's like so many scenes. But every now and then I would notice there'd be these really great scenes, and there's so few between Torres and 7. There's hardly nothing. And I mean, on the fingers of one hand, you can count how many times they had a scene where they actually had to do something worthwhile together. I mean, more than just like, do the phase coils and pass me the regulator and, what's the volume of the, flux and all that. I mean, there's a very few scenes that are actually of substance between those characters. And every one of them that I saw, I loved so much. And I just wished we'd gotten more of it,
I also enjoyed how much Torres hated 7. And so maybe you get more scenes like that, and maybe that goes away a little bit. I don't know.
Maybe, I don't know. I would have been there for it, man. I'd have been there for it. But let's talk about Voyager. Let's talk about The Void, season 7, episode 15, where Voyager gets trapped in this empty region of space where all these other ships are preying on each other to survive, and she forms sort of this little mini federation. This is certainly an episode that has come up on the podcast before, but I want to hear your take on it, Jimmy.
So to me, if you were to boil all of Voyager down into one episode, it's this episode, right? They're in an unknown. They're faced with difficult decisions. Janeway decides she's going to embrace Federation values in order to get through. And then they also encounter a new species that 7 and the Doctor work with, stuff like this. And I just feel like most of the best bits of Voyager are just present in this episode. And this is definitely very much a Janeway episode, although I do appreciate something Voyager got better at as it got along is giving other characters some stuff to do. Like there's some nice Tom Paris and Torres stuff in this episode, I think, that you didn't have to put into the episode. We didn't need a scene where Tom Paris and Torres were getting served. Was it an anniversary dinner or something like that? Or just maybe just a romantic dinner from Neelix. It wasn't necessary, but it made the episode better, and it kind of increased kind of like the family aspect of the show. But I also loved that like Voyager is, I feel like one of the main themes is it's a affirmation of Federation values. I feel like that's one of the main things Voyager's going for. Of course, there's situations where it doesn't work out, particularly like with the Kazon and stuff like that. But I feel like this episode, Janeway decides to go all in on Federation values, and it's what saves them. And I think if you're watching Star Trek and you don't like Federation values, it's going to be a very difficult watch for you. You kind of have to embrace, you have to like the whole like working together to become better than you were as individuals, community aspect of the Federation, and that's what's on display here, and it kind of shows how and why it can work, how it could potentially also go wrong, because it almost doesn't work here for Janeway, and there's definitely some like she's taking some risks, she's giving away food and supplies they need in order to be able to survive in this void, and if her gambit doesn't work, if she's not able to get people to work with her, they die. And so I liked kind of the exploration of Federation values, and how I like Janeway as a character, and I like how she puts her money where her mouth is. She puts her opinions and values on the line, and I also like that it worked out. I would have been, like, for instance, something that disappointed me about Enterprise is when they went to the Zindi Expanse, and they abandoned their Federation values, and they get rewarded for it.
Well, there's no Federation in Enterprise.
True. But you can still kind of feel the Federation values building throughout Enterprise. And I don't mind that they necessarily went against the Federation values, but the fact that they went against it and rewarded for it, I mean, they got what they needed. There was really no negative consequences other than they kind of felt bad about it. And so to me, that kind of feels like a show that should have been about the building of Federation and why it exists and why it works. Having that in there doesn't make sense to me. And so when you compare those two things, I think The Void gets it right, whereas they got that wrong in season 3 of Enterprise.
As we record this, one of the episodes that has just aired is the Discovery episode Scavengers. Did you have a chance to see that one?
Yes, that's the most recent one, right? Yeah.
Yep, the most recent one. And one of the things I really, really loved about the episode was that there's consequences for terrible behavior.
Agreed, yeah.
How many times in Star Trek do they wave off? Like, oh, you totally disobeyed orders. You totally, 17 admirals told you not to do the thing. You went and did the thing. You received written instructions not to do the thing. You did the thing anyway, but that's all right. We love you. It's all good.
I know.
There's 5 seconds left in the episode. So just, let's just gloss over that. And it's like, dude, that is not how bureaucracies work. Like, that is not how these things actually happen. And I really appreciated the fact that there was actually consequences for once. And it was handled deftly, and I think in a way that spoke truly to me about how people would react about it. So that's one of the reasons I loved it. So I totally get what you're saying there. I haven't watched most of Enterprise since original broadcast, except for episodes that have been discussed on the podcast. So I have to go rewatch those. So I'm getting towards the end of season 1 of Enterprise. In fact, I just finished, because I live tweet the episodes as I watch them. I just finished watching Detained, which is a season 1 episode towards the end of season 1. So when I get into that Xindi part, which I think is season 3, I could be wrong about that.
It's almost season 3, yeah.
Yeah, it's all season 3. I'll keep an eye out for that. That may have an impact on how I like the episode or not.
Have you seen season 3?
I've seen all of it, but it was all in original broadcast. So we're talking, it's been 20 years since I've seen some of the episodes.
Particularly the one I'm thinking of is the episode where they need supplies. I think there's actually a couple of examples of it, but they need supplies, and they ask for a ship for some, and the ship's like, no, we need them too. And so they're like, okay, well, we can go steal them. And they go and steal them, and Archer's like, I'm sorry, but he still stole them. And now they're stranded, and I think they don't have more drive or something. I'm a little fuzzy because I've only seen it once, obviously. But Archer feels bad about it, and it comes up in season 4 where he talks about how he hates that he had to do that. But at the same time, they were able to complete their mission because he did that, and it was necessary. And while those questions can be interesting, I don't know. It just felt like it was like, well, it's okay to steal. Or there was one where they had a clone trip.
That episode has got a lot of controversy surrounding it.
And I can see why. And it's kind of along the same lines. And one problem I have with Enterprise is there were a lot of episodes that felt like they were trying to be other episodes. That episode felt like it was trying to be Tuvix a little bit, which is also kind of a controversial episode, but in a good way.
Do you want to register an opinion on Tuvix?
I mean, I do think Tuvix was murdered. I do disagree with the choice Janeway made. I think Tuvok, who was my favorite character on Voyager, actually. I think Tuvok and Neelix died in that transporter accident. And I think when Janeway decided to separate them back into who they were, she was killing Tuvix. That was murder. There was an episode I listened to of yours where someone said, who had the opposite opinion. Mm-hmm. If Tuvix had come, but he was never conscious, if he was unconscious the whole time, would we disagree with that decision? And the obvious answer seems no, because you don't know that's a life. But I would argue that if he doesn't have any consciousness, he's in a coma, we let people die in comas all the time. If we feel like there's no way of reviving them, we will pull the plug and let them go. So I don't think that's an analogous situation, because if he comes back in the transporter pad and Tuvix is not conscious and he's not moving around, walking and doing stuff, that's akin to being in a coma. That's not the same thing as someone who's living their life and has a consciousness and an opinion and a point of view. But that question did stick with me from a previous podcast that you put on there.
Oh, wow. Well, I'm glad someone listens to my podcast. I think that's fantastic. I'm glad it's something that stuck with you. You brought up Babylon 5 earlier, and one of the things that Joe Straczynski said about his show was that, and I think this is applicable to Star Trek in certain circumstances, not all, but I think certainly it is applicable to Tuvix, is that he didn't want to give you right answers. He wanted to start a bar fight. And so I feel like that's part of this, and like an example of Babylon 5 I'd bring up is that episode Believers in season 1, which is with the small kid that has the medical problem. And it's all about whether or not he should get the operation. And it's very much about that. You can obviously take the side of the parents. You can obviously take the side of the kid. You can take the side of the doctor. And there's all these sort of right answers that are in the episode, and they're all wrong and they're all right all at the same time. And as the Vorlon ambassador famously says in the episode, the truth is a 3-edged sword, right? So there you go.
It's true. And I think that's something sci-fi has that other genres don't. Because anytime, if you try to make a real life situation, we have our biases for that real life situation. We have emotional, personal connections with it. Whereas with a sci-fi show, even if you're being inspired by a real life situation, you're able to have the audience be on mostly completely neutral ground and approach it in different ways. And I think that makes a thought experiment better, I guess.
Oh, I absolutely concur. But I'm going to give you a chance to redeem yourself, Jimmy, because you've been beaten up on Enterprise.
Okay.
But yet the M5 has selected some Enterprise episodes for us to talk about. And because they are season 4 episodes, it's really these 3 episode arcs. So we're going to talk about them as one. And that's The Forge, Awakening, and Kirshara. That's Enterprise season 4 episodes 7, 8, and 9. So redeem yourself as an Enterprise viewer, Jimmy, and tell me what is glorious, amazing, and beautiful about these episodes.
Well, fair enough. I haven't been maybe I've been a little unfair to Enterprise. I necessarily dislike season 3, just certain little things about it. And the first 2 seasons I thought were okay, but season 4 is where Enterprise really grabbed me. And apparently that's a bit of a common opinion, which makes sense to me. Mm-hmm. I think season 4 of Enterprise did 2 things. First of all, they started telling bigger stories that couldn't necessarily be contained in 45 minutes. Enterprise is always character-driven to an extent, but I feel like it wasn't until season 4 that they were... there were exceptions to this. There were some really good episodes in the first 3 seasons. Season 3 did have some good character stuff, but there's some really good episodes in the first 2 seasons still, but I did feel like they didn't really start delving into the characters until season 4. And that's something I like. This bit here, we really delve into Archer and T'Pol's character in this 3-parter. And then also, I feel like it's difficult to make a prequel because with Deep Space Nine, the Dominion War, you don't necessarily think that the Federation's going to lose, but it's still possible. Anything could happen. Mm-hmm. Enterprise, that's not really the case. And it felt like they tried to add that with the temporal Cold War.
Right.
But I personally hated that. I thought it was kind of a distraction from what I was interested in Enterprise, and that was kind of the world building of the pre-Federation Star Trek universe. And that's also really present here, where they're really delving into who the Vulcans were compared with how we see them in the original series. Even throughout the first, second season, I really enjoyed the Vulcan episodes and the Andorian episodes throughout. And in fact, I like the Andorians in the original series, and I was really disappointed they never really popped up in a meaningful way in Deep Space Nine, Next Gen, and Voyager, because I always really liked them. Obviously, they were my favorite.
One thing I could just add to the mix on that is I remembered watching the show in original broadcast, Enterprise, and man, that was like the main thing they hit in all the advertising was that we will be revisiting a race you have not seen since TOS, right? I mean, they mentioned that, I think, in like every ad, every commercial, every promo you saw. It was all about, we are going back to a TOS race you have not seen. You know, you are going to blow your minds. You know, it's going to be amazing, right? That was the whole thing. It was like Andorians, and we didn't know what to expect until they showed up. And it was great. I loved everything about them in Enterprise.
Yeah, same here. So even though I've been kind of criticizing the first couple seasons, the Vulcan and Andorian stuff in the first couple seasons was great. I really loved it. It was just when they went into the temporal Cold War or had another episode where Trip got stranded somewhere, that's where we're kind of like, okay, we need a little bit more going on here. But yeah, and so I like that. I liked the stuff going on with T'Pol and her mother. That was a really sad storyline. You know, I liked Archer's story in this as well. I just thought it worked in part because it informed us about the Vulcans, but it also made sense with what comes later. And when a prequel can do that, it's great. Sometimes I struggle with that. Like the Borg episode of the Enterprise was a cool episode, but I didn't think it worked well with what we saw with the Borg later on. That's what kept that episode from being like great for me, is the fact that on its own it's good, but with the rest of the universe it doesn't seem to make as much sense. And I think with a prequel you have certain expectations, whereas it's okay if Next Gen and stuff like that changes it because it's been 100 years. But with a prequel, we have kind of expectations of we're going to learn more about these things we love, but we still expect it to kind of explain and work with what we've seen later on. And I thought this 3-parter did a really good job of that.
So no mention of these episodes can ever come up on Trek Profiles without me mentioning a friend of the show and former guest, Jim Morehouse, who goes by Enterprise Extra on Twitter because he was an extra in the episode Awakening.
Oh, wow.
So, yeah, if you go back, Jimmy, and watch the episode, at one point when Trip is on the bridge, he turns to the guy who's sitting where Malcolm normally sits, and he says, raise the shields and go to red alert, raise the shields and, arm the weapons. And he's the relief technical officer sitting there at the station. So he's just in a few little scenes. He doesn't have any lines, but he won a charity auction for a walk-on part on the show, and that's what he was. So
that's awesome.
When you go back back and watch it. Yeah, he's a former guest on this very podcast. So we love Jim, and we're very jealous of him for having that wonderful experience. So when you rewatch the episodes, now you'll know. Keep an eye out for our friend Jim.
That's awesome. And I've always wanted to be an extra, or at least I love watching extras. I love like when something happens and there's a reaction shot and there's like 4 or 5 people in the background. I love watching the extras' reactions, especially the ones that overdo it. They're like, ah! I always look out for extras. That's awesome.
So there was a really weird experience I had actually just as we record this. We have already mentioned the episode Scavengers, and there's a quick scene of 2 characters doing a walk and talk down the hall. And for some reason, I totally did not pay any attention to them because I was captivated by this person walking in the background who had no lines. And I every time the scene came up, because I rewatched it, and I was like, now who is that person? What are they doing? Where are they? I mean, it's nobody. They don't say anything. They don't go anywhere. They don't do anything. They just walk down the hall. And I'm like, that person is more interesting to me than whatever's going on with the characters right now. It's weird how this stuff just grabs you, you know? It's so weird. But since we've been talking about Discovery, I think we should actually talk about a Discovery episode. Let's talk about If Memory Serves, Season 2, Episode 8. This is where Spock and Burnham head to Talos 4. Obviously, a very big moment for a lot of Star Trek fans going back to Talos 4, and really just an amazing episode with that incredible opening with the cage footage at the beginning of the episode. But tell me, Jimmy, what about this episode made it stand out to you?
Well, obviously that opening. I love that. And I never realized how much Anson Mount actually looked like the actor who originally played Pike.
Jeffrey Hunter.
Yeah, until that opening. Even my wife was kind of watching that with me. She didn't really watch the shows with me, but sometimes I'll be watching an episode and she does something else. She'd be like, wow, that's really good casting. And I really liked Anson Mount as Pike. I'm really excited for that spin-off show. But yeah, I thought kind of similar to the Enterprise things, they did a good job of like using the lore that's already there, kind of building it up and showing it to us in a different way. And I love the exploration of Burnham and Spock's relationship. Now, I do have a question. How did people react to Spock in Season 2 here? Because when you bring back a beloved character, it's always kind of a dicey situation, how the fan base... I liked what they did with Spock personally. I don't know. I'm curious how people reacted.
This is a difficult question you've asked me, Jimmy, to be honest, because I'm very active on Twitter and Facebook and Star Trek groups. And I'm very careful to separate the fact that the people who post a lot on Twitter are the minority of Star Trek fans in the world.
Sure.
And even the things that I see and the people who are most vocal about whatever their opinions are, plus or minus, they're a small subset of the people who are actually out there. I mean, Look, I'm knee-deep in Star Trek Twitter. I'm knee-deep in Star Trek podcasting. And there are people I talk to in my life. Well, I'll say things like, I do a podcast. And they're like, what's that? Like, they don't even know that this thing exists, right? And there are people who are Star Trek fans who have no idea. One of the things that blew me away to even take it to another level is that, the big Star Trek convention for every year for the past several years has been the Star Trek Las Vegas convention. I was talking to someone who went on the Star Trek cruise, which is a thing which exists.
That's awesome.
There is a Star Trek cruise.
That's awesome.
Put that into Google, Star Trek the cruise, and you can learn all about it. I'm going to be on it in 2020. There's not one in 2021. The next one will be in 2022. So it's a 7-day cruise. And what the company that does it, ECP, Entertainment Cruise Productions, what they do is their people charter the whole ship. So the whole cruise ship for the whole week, all the people that you're interacting with, like in a customer service capacity, the people who are doing the food and beverage, the people who are doing all the entertainment, everything, it is all Star Trek all the time for 7 days.
And I assume you can play Tongo and Damjad and all the different games.
Even the evening programs, like, the shows, the food, like everything is Star Trek. Everything. They redecorate the ship. You can look at photos on there. I think they do like a little highlight reel every year. It's totally Star Trek. So I'm a cruise guy. My wife and I, we love to cruise, but I've never been on the Star Trek cruise. So I'm going on the next one, which will be in 2022, March, I believe. So anyway, that's a little diversion there. But the reason I bring it up is because I was talking to someone who went to it and they had no idea that there were Star Trek conventions. And it's like, how does someone end up on a Star Trek cruise and like not be aware that there are Star Trek conventions, especially this gigantic one, which is the biggest Star Trek convention in the world every year in Las Vegas? Not to say that you would have gone to it, but how can this happen that you could be a Star Trek fan and not know about these things and somehow end up on the Star Trek cruise and be that kind of fan and not know about this stuff? So that was like it was a moment of calibration for me. And I think people who are in Star Trek social media, Star Trek Twitter, Star Trek Facebook groups, they often confuse like the stuff that they see from vocal people with like what the quote unquote the fans think. And I'm always very hesitant about that. And I am also very hesitant to speak for anybody except for myself.
That's fair.
On the show. So I will tell you that there are people who were like, no, this sucks. That's not Leonard Nimoy. It's not how he was. There's always going to be that type. There's people who said made total sense, and you're going to see all these kinds of opinions online. I personally enjoyed it. I thought it was fine. And I think for the longevity of the show, I think it's okay to do that. Having said that, the one thing I have always said about any new version of Star Trek, whatever it is that I don't actually like it when they revisit the old characters and old planets because it makes the universe seem small. So as an example, that people were saying, I heard there's going to be Trills in season 3. Well, we better see where Dax is in Discovery. I was like, no, let's not. Because if you ever meet another Trill and it's Dax, I mean, nothing at all against the original characters. Nothing at all. It's, we love them.
Right.
But
no, I hear you.
It's a big universe out there, man. Let's go meet another symbiont. Let's go meet, which we did, which was wonderful. Let's go see other worlds. Let's go explore and see the things. If all we ever run into is Betazoids, Trill, and Andorians and humans and Vulcans and Klingons and Romulans. It's like, okay, been there, done that,
Right.
I want more. They have the ability to deliver that to us now. And that's what I want to see. That's a personal preference, So I kind of am always against this idea of revisiting the old characters. And I think that one of the things that season 3 is about, and I think we'll find out more about this, but it's really just them trying to correct the chaos of the production of Discovery the first 2 seasons. Because if you look, there were so many people who came and went through the first couple seasons of the show. And I think it's very analogous to what we were talking about before with Next Gen and all the problems they had in season 1 and season 2. And so they really just wanted to press the reset button in a way and just get away from the prequel, get away from having to worry about canon, and just sort of repudiate everything that came before and said, yeah, forget that. Now we're doing this show. Because this is a whole new show.
It is, for sure. Well, in fact, similar kind of millennium we were talking about before, each season has felt completely different.
Yeah.
I really like season 2. I'm really enjoying season 3 as well. And I agree with you. It is kind of, as far as the drama of the show goes, it's a bit liberating to be able to, have there be consequences.
Yeah.
In season 2, there's a lot of personal stakes, and that's good, and that's good drama. But I know the Klingons aren't going to defeat the Federation. I know that all life in the universe isn't going to be wiped out. But now we're in the future, and what's at stake is the Federation. And I could actually legitimately see the season ending with the Federation completely falling. And that's really cool stakes to me.
Yeah, which I think would be amazing to actually see in the show, right? Because I'm responding to people online and, which I know is not representative. And, it's just I'm responding to what I see. But there are so many people who are like, well, this season is obviously going to be about rebuilding the Federation. And one of the questions I have is why rebuild it? The show has to make a case for that. Not saying they shouldn't do it, but why is it better than what's happening now? And are people going to vote? Is there going to be a political process, or is it going to be under force of arms and phasers? We're going to rebuild the Federation. That doesn't sound right to me. So I really, because I'm very interested in political history, I guess, and that's my own personal thing. I would love to see that. I don't know if that's what I'm in for or not,
right.
But I'm open to the idea that they could go anywhere with this. And as long as it's entertaining and tells a good story and it has a lot of quote unquote what I look for in Star Trek, which is these ethical morality stories, I'm there. I'll be okay however they go. But I'm okay if they don't do it. I'm okay if we don't get the Federation back. As long as they do something better, different, or it has a positive message, I think it's great.
I agree. And I think if you're gonna watch something like this, especially something that's big, Star Trek's massive when you take everything into account. I mean, it's okay to legitimately dislike something. I'm not saying you have to like everything. But one of the problems people have is I think they go in with an expectation. And when the show doesn't meet that expectation, well, they say, I don't like this, this is bad. You can hope for things, but you should also you should meet the show on its own terms. If it's not trying to do that, don't criticize it for not doing that. Whatever that is. So yeah, I agree. And I do think that'd be a really interesting way to go. And like you said, they don't go the way, that's fine. For me, as long as they're telling good stories with the characters, that's personally what I look for. Now, there's other things I like about Star Trek. I like the world building. I like the morality questions, like you said. But for me, it's all about the characters and the stories with the character.
Fair enough. Fair enough. One of the little bits, though, in this episode, I love these little things that jump out at me. And this is just my own nerdy self speaking, because I'm not a computer programmer or anything like that, or a coding guy. I am an amateur at those things, and I do some of that to run my website and all that stuff. I just got a kick out of the fact that they talked about SQL injections. At one point, Arium is like, there's multiple SQL injections. I was like, oh, that's cool. I really enjoyed that. It made me laugh.
Something in Doctor Who I love, where they have something that alters people's memories, and it's called retcon.
Oh, yes, of course. It's a wonderful little reference, isn't it? So I have to ask you, Jimmy, you're a new fan to the show, and you felt compelled to post about it online, which is how I found you on a message forum. And you were posting about the fact that you've just decided you're a Star Trek fan recently in your life, all things considered. You've now watched every bit of the show that there is to consume, and you felt compelled to post about it. You're talking to me for a couple hours, some rando from the internet, on why you care about Star Trek. But I want to put the question directly to you. Why does Star Trek matter in your life? Why are you spending the time to talk to me about it? What's worthwhile about it for you?
I love talking about stories with people. I love a good story. I love a good fake universe, because the real universe is so chaotic. It's hard to pin down what was really going on and stuff like that unless you're looking back. But I'd love to kind of get immersed in a big universe or in a really good story or a really good character. And I love talking about it with other people. I love the social aspect of these things. One of my favorite shows growing up was Lost. I don't know if you ever watched Lost.
I did. I'm very negative on it.
Oh, well, okay. Well, we're not going to talk about that.
It goes nowhere. I'm very frustrated because it seems to go nowhere at the end. I don't know.
But one thing I loved about Lost, I love the show itself. I'm a little lukewarm on the ending, but I loved going online and talking to people about, okay, what's going to happen next? What does this mean? What does that mean? And of course, very few of those theories ended up being true. there was such a social aspect. And a lot of my friends watched Lost too, and we would sometimes watch Lost together. And I do have some friends who watch Star Trek, but they're where I used to live. And I would talk to them sometimes. I'd send them texts and stuff like that about what was going on and where I was and stuff like that. But in general, I do enjoy the kind of the social part of it. And so that's why I posted online about my opinions and stuff like that, because I wanted to talk about it,
Well, Jimmy, I've enjoyed talking to you, but I have to tell you that the M5 is signaling me that it's time for the Kobayashi Maru.
All right.
The Kobayashi Maru is a challenging and difficult test, cunningly prepared by the M5 and some of my listeners. Should you not only survive the test, but pass it as well, the M5 will award you an honorary Star Trek title on behalf of our show. Are you ready, Jimmy?
I'm ready.
M5, load the Kobayashi Maru simulator and prepare to record Jimmy's responses.
Simulation ready.
Faith of the Heart, skip or no skip?
I'll say no skip.
Which planet would be worse to be stuck on, Railing 7 or Kaiser 12?
Railing 7.
Of these, which is the best Klingon episode? Heart of Glory, Affliction, or the Vulcan Hello?
The best Klingon episode, I'm going to say Heart of Glory.
Captain Jellicoe, hero or zero?
Oh, I'm going to say hero. I think he's a bit misunderstood.
Would you rather have a gross of T-88 scanners or a gross of self-sealing stem bolts?
Definitely the self-sealing stem bolts.
Outstanding. Simulation complete. M5, please compute the results and tell us if our guest has passed the Kobayashi Maru.
Results processed.
Do you remember the T-88 scanners from Lower Decks?
No, I don't. Maybe that's why I chose the self. I do remember the self-sealing stem bolts with Nog and yeah.
It was the episode where Tendi and Rutherford are going crazy because they have the little portable scanners and they go over to that new ship. And they're like, you've got the new scanners, the one with the purple stripe. Oh my God. Right. And they're like, I stole one. They're like, you stole one. I stole 20. Okay,
I do remember that. Okay. But I didn't remember some of those first references. Like, which one's Stay in the Heart? Or what was the first one you asked me?
Faith of the Heart?
Yeah, which one's that?
That's the theme song to Enterprise.
Oh, God, no, skip. No. I hated that. Oh, man.
There's a lot of debate about whether or not you should skip it or not when watching the episode.
I couldn't stand that song.
I'm firmly in the no skip category.
I am misrepresented on here.
I am firmly in the no skip category. In fact, every time I do one of my live tweets of the episodes, I always post like a rockin' out gif And I'm like, time for the theme song.
Fair enough.
But that's okay. I'm not hung up on it, but it's just one of my things. So, okay, Jimmy, I am pleased to tell you that the M5 has calculated that you have passed the Kobayashi Maru. Congratulations.
Thank you. That's an honor.
And now, the M5, who has analyzed your answers, will award you an honorary Star Trek title on behalf of our podcast. M5, what title shall we award our guest?
Jimmy is awarded the title of Chief Tribble Exterminator of the Klingon Empire.
Jesus, that sounds like a terrible job.
Well, sometimes these titles, it's all what the M5 comes up with. I don't know. I'll talk to him about it. But, on the Klingon Empire, being a Tribble Exterminator is probably a high honor,
Okay, that's a good point. That's a good point. It's definitely very difficult job. I can see that being very prestigious.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is normally the part of the show where I ask people how they can get in touch with you if they want to continue the Star Trek conversation, but I know that you're not on a lot of the social media. So is there anything you want to share with people about what you have coming up?
My friend and I, the one who I watched X-Files and Millennium with and stuff like that, and who I was going to watch Star Trek with, we decided we're going to start a podcast together. And it was something we've been talking about for a while, but we decided to finally start doing it. And we, for lack of a better title, we decided to call ourselves pop culture historians, not realizing that's an actual job that people have.
It is.
Which sounds like an amazing job. We're amateurs, we're not pop culture historians. But we're going to start off with 2 projects. We're going to watch all of Doctor Who. Now, I've already seen it all. I've seen the classic stuff, I've seen the new stuff of Doctor Who. He's seen none of it. He doesn't know anything about Doctor Who. And so he's starting in the 60s with the first Doctor, William Hartnell. And we're both going to watch it, and so there's going to be no spoilers if you haven't seen it, because obviously he doesn't know. We're just going to be kind of his reaction and my reaction, someone who's seen it already, and his as someone who's completely new to it. So we thought that was a cool dynamic. And then we're also going to do one on the history of superhero movies. We're just going to look at superhero movies over time and how they've changed. And we're going to start, again, at the beginning with, like, in the 30s with the Flash Gordon serials.
Oh, nice.
And stuff like that, and kind of go through it. So these are both pretty long-term projects. We're still working out kind of how we want to do it. Obviously, I'll let you know once we get that officially going.
Oh, absolutely. I'll be happy to post about it.
Yeah, cool. Thank you.
That's a pretty standard sort of podcast format, is these rewatch episodes. A good Star Trek analog for that, where you have sort of the person who's watched it and the person who hasn't, is one that I'll give a plug for, which is a personal favorite. It's called Rachel Watches Star Trek. It's a podcast where this husband and wife over in the UK, he's actually American, but he lives over in the UK with his wife, and he is like our people, right? He's like one of these, like, I've been a Star Trek fan my entire life. I love Star Trek. I love everything about Star Trek. And he marries this lady, Rachel, who thinks like Star Trek is for nerds, and like no one watches that show. It's stupid, And so they sit down and watch the episodes together and then give sort of their opinions on it as they're watching it. And it's very fun. She makes up these little songs. Like every time they mention the Prime Directive, she has a little Prime Directive. She does a little song. It's very fun.
That does sound fun, yeah.
Yeah, it's lighthearted. Anybody out there, give Rachel Watches Star Trek a listen. It's highly amusing and entertaining. But there's lots of shows like that are in a similar format. So, yeah, let us know, and we'll be happy to retweet that and put it out on all of our social media so people can find you. Jimmy, thank you so much for being part of Trek Profiles.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I enjoyed it, and a lovely surprise to get a message from you.
Here ends this installment of the Trek Profiles podcast. And before we offer a Trek quote to close this episode, I'd like to remind you that you may send us your kind and helpful feedback, your 50-page diatribe on why Neelix is awesome, or audio recordings of yourself singing Andorian opera to feedback@trekprofiles.com, or on Facebook or Twitter @TrekProfiles. Anything you send me, maybe using the show, or maybe scrambled in a transporter accident like in the motion picture. Some portions of the Kobayashi Maru questions on this episode were submitted by listener Abby Summer. If you'd like to submit questions for possible use on the show, there's a post up at TrekProfiles.com that will explain how to do just that, and then you can get your very own shout out and a credit in the show notes as well. This time, I leave you with a quote from Captain Kirk, who in the episode The Tholian Web said, quote, "I must say I prefer a crowded universe much better," close quote. Thanks for listening, and live long and prosper.
This handcrafted podcast is brought to you by Stars and Sky Media Lab. It's cosmic.
Well, anyway, it's nice to meet you. Thanks for agreeing to be on the show. I've been doing a series actually with newer fans, people who have discovered the show just recently. And so when I saw your post, I was very eager to talk to you and get you on, because a lot of the people that have been on my show, you know, their story is like, I can't remember a time in my life where I wasn't watching Star Trek.
Right. Well, I did go back and listen to some. And so, I was... After listening to some of the people you've had on there, I was kind of surprised you reached out to me. My thing is like, if you're a fan, you're a fan, right? And I don't set these bars like you have to like this show, hate that show, or you have to like it exactly in this kind of way. I don't believe in any of that. But the one, if you want to hear the first one I did like this, you got to check out the one I did. I think it was 2 episodes ago with Salwa. I did check the one out actually.
Yeah, so that was great, man, because she came into this with like nothing, you know, especially growing up in Malaysia. She had no knowledge of any of this. And so she had her very own takes on things, which was glorious.
And in part because I think the best thing about the original series show, not necessarily the movies, but the show, is that relationship between Kirk, Picard, and Spock. I love the dynamic between the three of them.
Kirk, Spock, and McCoy.
What'd I say? Kirk,
Picard, and Spock.
Oh, wow. That's
that's going to make it into the bonus material.
Yes, for sure. Yes, Kirk, McCoy, and Spock.
When you were watching Lost, were you? There was a very popular message board called Television Without Pity. Did you know that one?
I did know that one, yes.
That's where I used to hang out, and I was posting extensively in Lost, and in I think at the same time the original Battlestar, the remade Battlestar Galactica was on, and so I was posting heavily in both of those forums, and every single thing I had liked about Lost turned out not to be the case, and it's just they're on the island, they're off the island. I couldn't even keep it straight anymore at one point, so just the whole show lost me. Oh God, did I just say that?
We have a rim shot.
Yeah. If I did sound effects, I would do one there.